could you start with sharing a little bit of your testimony? And I'm going to turn the program over to you now, and then we'll take questions at the end. So here we go.
All right.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead. This is Heinz. Here you go, everybody. Ready? Welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to share this program with you. Sorry, I couldn't be there. Normally, we go to California this time of year. We have two sons and their families down there, and we spent some time. Unfortunately, things were closed up a bit in Southern California, so we had to change plans, and here we are in a Zoom meeting. I run an apologetics forum group up here in Washington State, and much like Bill and Jim Hamlin do down in California there. Just a little bit of background myself. I've been, I'm retired now. My life's a little complicated. I was born in the Netherlands. My parents decided to emigrate to Canada shortly after the war. So of course I came with them, and I got all my education in Canada in physics, and my graduate degree is in nuclear physics. So I'm basically a scientist by training. My first full-time job actually was with Bell Telephone Labs in New Jersey. And so I was fortunate enough to spend time there working with a scientist, and I was involved in the Unix software activity. And then after 10 years there, I went to California, to Santa Monica, with a startup company. And so I've been involved in the high-tech industry for all of my career. The last 20 years I spent as running my own internet consultancy. And now I've basically retired. I spent a lot of time developing lectures and courses on apologetics, creation versus evolution being the main thing. And I've given lectures here in the US, Canada, and overseas. My wife and I often go overseas to teach at seminaries there, teach courses on apologetics. And but now we don't go there that often. So that's my background. I grew up in a very devout family, and I'm one of 10 children, 5 born in Holland and 5 born in Canada. And we have 5 children as well, half of them born in Canada and the other half in the US. So this is our third country, and I enjoy the freedom that we have here. So I grew up in a Christian home. I went to a secular university, and of course I was challenged there by the geology professor saying, forget what you were taught at church and in the Bible. Look at these layers. This is how things really happen. It took a long time for all these layers to form, and so that was my first challenge to my faith. I didn't let it bother me. And as I grew older and as our children grew older, I got involved in teaching them the Bible and science. And I've maintained my faith and my belief in young earth creationism. And I have the privilege of speaking on that topic many different places. And the lecture that we have here, I've labeled it Information, the Basis for Life. I like to say that the only difference between living things and dead things is information. And so we'll take a look at that. Now, I made up a sheet, and Bill probably has circulated that with the fill-ins. And as I flip through these slides, you'll see the words for the fill-ins come out. Now, what I'm going to cover in this next slide here is these 10 topics. And first of all, what is our view of life from a biblical point of view and from a evolution point of view? I'm going to define some terms, and then I'm going to talk about the nature of information, the nature of machines, and the nature of programs, because we see In the computer world, of course, we have information, we have machines, we have programs, and how do we relate that to living organisms? So rather than just reading all that, let me just jump right into it. The views of life. The biblical view of life is given to us actually in the first chapter of Genesis. You'll see that the word kind is used 10 times. Everything God created according to its kind, and kinds reproduced according to their kinds. So he says that 10 times for all um, uh, concepts of life. So I think he means it. And so that's our basis for the biblical view of life. Now, if you look at the evolution view, and I'm sure the children have been taught this in school, the basic concept that everything is related to common ancestry. In other words, they would say we evolved from the previous more primitive form of life, and all life came about that way. And so then the question is, well, where does first life come? There has to be a first life in order to get this diversity of life. So evolutionists would say, well, everything rose through mutations and natural selection and through random chance processes. Molecules in the early days of the earth somehow got together and formed a more complex molecule and DNA, RNA, and that formed the base of life. And nobody knows, no scientist has come up with an idea how that might have happened. They just assumed it happened. And at the bottom there, you'll see that the figure, you can see my mouse moving on the story of evolution, origin of the universe, the earth, the primordial soup, RNA, DNA, primitive animals, fish, reptiles, mammals, lower primates, and all the way up to us as the most complex life. So that's the view of people who believe in evolution. And very different from the biblical view as explained in the book of Genesis, particularly. So another concept that I want to introduce, because it'll come up later in our talk, everything that we see came about by three different means. Either came here just random chance. I mean, the sand on the seashore, where do those grains of sand, how did they get there? And why are they in certain arrangements? Well, that's just chance. The second thing that can explain how things came to be is laws of nature. And I like to use the example of law of gravity. If you step on a table and put your one foot over the end, which way are you going? Up or down? I think you'll agree that we always go down. That's a law of nature, which is true and cannot be argued. And if it can't be explained by that, well, then it must be designed. And if you look at these faces on Mount Rushmore, you'll recognize the faces of some past presidents. How did those faces get on there? Did the rain fall on the rock in such a way that it carved out those faces exactly the way we see them? That would be random chance. Or it could possibly be a law of nature. If you got the rain falling on this rock in a certain size of raindrops, it would carve out these faces. Well, I think you'll agree that neither of those explain how those faces got there. The faces got there because somebody designed them, the faces according to how these men look, and then somebody else carved those faces out. And that's what we call design. And that requires an intelligence. All design that we see requires intelligence. It requires an intelligent agent. Okay, in this case, it's the person that marked these vases out, and then there's a craftsman who just carved them out. That requires an intelligent mind to do that. Nobody can, you can't send an animal out there and have them carve out these faces. There's intelligence involved in that. Now, the basis for life, of course, living beings is the cell, the living cell. And I'm not going to go into explaining what all these are, but basically these are the major components of a living cell. You can see the cell here, and you don't have to read all those words, but you can see there is a nucleus involved there. There is ribosomes, there is, let's see, chromosomes, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And also there's a membrane which holds it all together, all very complex. And so you have proteins, which are chains of amino acids, you have DNA, you have RNA, you have ways of transcription from RNA to DNA, and that's needed to build proteins. You have catalysts for this. You have replication of the cells. I mean, there must be a way to duplicate the cell, and that's built into the cell. But now you need a protein to build a cell. But where's the protein come from? Well, it requires a cell. Where does the cell come from? It requires proteins. So you have what we often call a chicken and egg problem. Which one came first, the chicken or the egg? And there's no different here. You cannot explain that the cell happened through some natural random processes. Here are some examples. If you look at starting at the top left, you've got the cave wall, and there's some scratches. You can see on the rock face, there's some scratches. How did they happen? Well, you could say, well, little rocks came down and from the ceiling and carved up those lines you see. Well, some cases that might be explained. But then if you look at the one below, you'll see certain animals carved in the horses and cows and boars. How did they get there? Was that by random chance? Is that some law of nature that explains how that'll happen? No, that required design. That required an intelligent human being to carve those animals on that face wall. So then you come to the human genome, and the human genome consists of 3 billion base pairs. And I'll get to what a base pair means further on. But 3 billion of those. And we have in our bodies 75 trillion cells. Yeah, and we have different kinds of cells. Obviously, about 200 different kinds of cells. You get hair cells, fingernails cells, eye cells, ear cells, mouth cells, 200 different kinds. And it's all made up by these 75 trillion cells. Very, very complicated. Did that happen by chance? Well, if this can't happen by chance, the painting on the wall, how could something orders of magnitude more complex happen by random chance? So evolutionists see this too. But what do they say? Here's a few examples. And I use Richard Dawkins, who's a well-known British atheist and biologist. He says, biology is a study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. The bodies appear to have been designed for a purpose. Well, who designed it? He can't answer that. They believe that mutations and natural selection would do that. Nature did that. So, and here's admissions from two others. Dr. Todd from Kansas State says, even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. In other words, they just dismiss it because they can't consider that there's an intelligent designer. They don't consider that God exists. And Francis Crick says biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. They just can't admit it. but the evidence is so obvious, as we will see. So now we get into some definitions, and I'll try to make this as simple as possible. Evolution. Evolutionists believe that everything can be explained in terms of two entities, mass and energy. And we know from Einstein's equation, E equal mc squared, energy and mass can be converted one into the other. And we agree, that's a good science. But where to get information from? Can information form through random processes? We would say no. We have nothing in our experience that could show that information can come from random natural processes. So we'll see that life consists of three things: mass and energy. That's obvious. We have mass, we have energy. But there's a third thing, and that is information. And that information is encoded in the cell. And remember that mass and energy, that is material. We can see that, we can feel it, but information is non-material. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we look at computers and human cells. So the other thing that I'm going to use, what do we mean by information? Well, there's four parts of information, and this is, you can throw this on your sheet there too. Code, a code, I'll explain, a meaning, an action, and a purpose. Those four things. And I'll show you some examples of that. Here, the nature of information. If I took a bottle of ink and somehow it spilled on a piece of paper, would you expect to see any useful information that you could read there? I don't think so. It'll just a mess. It doesn't mean anything there. Now we have code that we deal with in the English language. So code in this case is the letters of the alphabet from A to Z. And for older people that can still read script language, you can almost read those words here in the script. But if you look at here's the message written in the sand, and you can clearly read that as the word right, which consists of 5 letters, the word in consists of 2 letters, and then sand, which consists of 4 letters. Does that consists of code, the letters from the alphabet. It consists of words, which have meaning, and it consists of some action and a purpose. How do these letters get in the sand there on the seashore? Did the waves wash up in such a way that it left these letters? I don't think I convinced you of that. I think it's clearly somebody wrote in the sand with a finger or a spoon or whatever. So that's information. And definitions, and I'm going to skip over this quickly, but see these 4 things. Code, in terms of the English language, we have an alphabet. In terms of our cells, we have DNA. That's the information in the DNA. We have meaning. So in the case of the English language, we have words that make sense. And in life itself, we have codons. And then we have expected action, which is a sentence. And then we have a purpose. The sentences have some purpose. So we're left with, this is the formal definition of information. It's encoded symbolically, represented message conveying expected action and intended purpose. If I look at a sentence, it has a purpose. It has a verb in that gives it action. So that's the definition that we're using. So now let's apply that to writing. So if I want to write something, we need letters, words, and sentences. So I can use letters from the alphabet, I can use numbers, and I can turn them into words. And there, with a verb in that sentence, that denotes action. And there's a purpose for that sentence. Those four things. So I'm going to look at two different sentences here. First of all, here you have some letters. Well, I recognize the letters as part of the English alphabet, of the Roman alphabet. Can anybody read that word? Is that German? Is that Dutch? Is that Russian? No, there is no language that I know, and probably none in the room, you know what language that is written in. So it is complex. Okay, the letters are complex. They're put down there for purpose, but there's no meaning to them. It's unspecified complexity. But if you look at this down below, we have a sentence with a subject, the cow jumped, that's a verb, over the moon. Do you understand what that sentence says? Yeah, that makes sense. So it has, code, the letters. It has meaning, in other words. Cow, I know what that word means. If I put that, spelled it CWO, I'd have no idea what that means. So these words have meanings. And then the action, in the verb, there's a verb that indicates action, and there's a purpose. The cow jumped over the moon. This is something you tell your little kids before they understand that doesn't work. But anyway, it's a meaningful sentence. So now we come to information in computers. Where is information stored in computers? It's stored on a disk. Either a solid state disk or a rotating disk, someplace where you have zeros and ones. But how do if I look at these zeros and ones, how do I make any sense of that? I don't know what that means. So the programmer, what he does, he writes in terms of pseudocode, different languages, Fortran language, the basic language, the C language, and different scripts, and I can sort of see what these words, these instructions do, and then you use a compiler to turn these into bits in 0 and 1, and then you can run the program. So this is what we call pseudocode. That I think programmers can understand what that's doing. But now let's look at these bits again, zeros and ones. I asked the question, does information have any weight? If I turn all these ones into zeros, will that disk weigh less? More? No, no difference. In other words, information has no weight to it at all. I mean, the information I showed you in the sentence there, those are words you can understand, but if I had different words, there'd be no difference in the weight of that information. There is no weight to information. But clearly, to write these programs, you need a programmer, okay? You need an intelligent agent. I mean, these programs are not going to just happen by random chance. I mean, in an operating system like Windows, if you change one bit in the operating system, the program will probably crash. It doesn't run. It's got to be very, very specific. So here is, and then we come to living systems. That's where we get into DNA. DNA is the molecule of life. And I said there are trillions of cells in our body. These cells here. We have 46 human chromosomes and 3 billion base pairs. These are the base pairs. A and T go together, and C and G go together. These are base pairs. We have 3 billion of those in our bodies. That's a huge number. And we have 30,000 different genes in our body. Did all of these just happen by chance, or is there a design for that? I think there's a design. This is way, way too complex. Okay, then what about machines? You'll see an assembly line of cars here in the top left. Now you can imagine, well, maybe those cars are they're designed by some human being, but you put them in the assembly line and they just get made. No, there's intelligence involved in that. First of all, you had to build the assembly line, the manufacture, the car factory as well. And so this requires an intelligent agent. And then we look at motors, and the motor of a car. That's another very, very complex entity. Did that happen? Can that happen by chance? All these metal pieces just get introduced, and they just fall into place, and voila, the motor works. Now, I think you'll agree it's called an intelligent designer to design it first of all, and then some other technicians to put that together. And so you're here, you have rotary motors, you have integrated circuits, and and CPUs, and storage units, all that make up a computer. All of those require an intelligent designer. Nothing happens by chance. Okay, so those are machines. You can deal with those. Well, there happen to be machines in your body. Now, fortunately, you can't feel those machines moving, but here is an example of a machine that actually looks like a rotator, and they do rotate. In fact, they can go at like 10,000 cycles per second. You don't feel them, but they're moving in your cells. And they can stop on a dime, so to speak. They can change direction. You're not going to feel that. But these are actual machines that fit in your body. And these machines wouldn't work unless all the parts are there, just like the machines that I showed you in the previous slide. All the parts of the car, they've got to be there. You can have a wheel, but if you don't put the tire on there, it doesn't work. All the parts need to be there. And that's a very important concept. It's called irreducible complexity. What that means is that all the parts need to be there for something to work. And the simplest thing to look at is like the mousetrap. Okay, you have a base, you have a hammer, you have a holding bar, a spring, and a catch there to hold that. If I took one of those parts off of there, would the mouse trap catch any mice? No, none. All 5 parts need to be there. That's a concept we call irreducible complexity. And Behe, the scientist, is credited with coming up with that term. Irreducible complexity. All parts functional, must be working, all 5 parts. Mousetrap, very simple, just 5 parts. But do you think a mousetrap is going to appear without somebody designing that and putting that together? No, even a mousetrap requires an intelligent designer. So,
did you know that germs in your intestines have sophisticated machines inside of them? Like all living things, E. coli bacteria contain DNA, which requires sophisticated machinery to read the DNA and turn the information into proteins, which are the major components of all living things. One of the key machines involved is the ribosome. According to the world's leading science journal Nature, the ribosome, together with its accessories, is probably the most sophisticated machine ever made. All of its components are active and moving, and it is environmentally friendly. Ribosomes, however, are not just stunning examples of nanotechnology. They also seriously undermine the idea that life arose spontaneously. Life is not possible without ribosomes. So, if a hypothetical first living cell arose spontaneously, this means ribosomes must have arisen spontaneously also. Call me a skeptic if you like, but the idea that sophisticated machines can arise without a designer sounds like a fairy tale.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, there was a machine that exists in your body, and there are thousands of them. I think it's a few hundred in each cell. You think those could happen by chance? No, somebody had to design that. Okay, so that's information, that's machines. Now let's talk about programs. Okay, if you're a software engineer, you know you could write programs in various different languages like Fortran, Basic, C, Java, and you know that the computers are comprised of hardware at the core, you know, the CPU, disk, mouse, etc. System software, and that we call that the operating system. And then there's very different application programs that run on top of that. They're very, very sophisticated, very complex. And here, you know, is just an example of turns out this is a Java program. Okay. So again, those programs, you can run them as applications on the system software. So it can run on Windows, it can run on Apple computers, what have you. So that's a computer program. Do you think that happened by chance? No, an intelligent programmer needed to write that. Okay, and then we look at, well, what about the cell, the human cell? Well, remember we talked about the ribosome, which is one of the machines. We talked about there has to be replication, reproduction of cells, and that comes about through DNA and the transcription process and a messenger RNA, and then it produces a protein. So all those things required to build a protein. And of course, cells have protein. So how do you get the cell? It's that old chicken and egg effect again. And so again, I'm not going to go through all these steps here, but the point is it's very complex and it's a chicken and egg kind of a problem. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, who understands programs, of course, and he says the human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. So he admits that the complexity of the programs in our body are orders of magnitude more complex than the Windows operating system that his company wrote. And remember, the operating system in a computer, if you take one bit out of place there, it'll fail. We have redundancy in our bodies. We have two hands, we have two ears, two eyes, and God gave us one mouth because he wants us to hear more than we talk. So again, our body is designed with intention. So then, summarizing, life requires information. I explained the information that's required, the DNA. It requires complexity. Okay, the DNA is consisted of the base pairs of A, T, and C, G. The codons, which consist of these base pairs, and life consists of 20 left-handed amino acids. There are thousands of different kinds of amino acids, but the only ones that comprise life are the 20 specific left-handed amino acids. Right-handed amino acids are not part of our body. So biological systems exhibit a specified complexity. Okay, I can put letters together and into a word, but it has to be a very specific order. And it also requires irreducible complexity. In other words, all the parts need to be there for the body to work. All the parts that you see in that picture of the cell, they all need to be there and functioning for the cell to work. And natural mechanisms or undirected causes cannot be used to explain the origin of complexity. I mean, complexity is not going to come about by random processes. It requires intelligent design. Intelligent design is the best explanation for the origin of specified complexity and irreducible complexity that we see in our living body. So a little bit more on information. I'm not going to spend time on this. We have the code, which is the alphabet. But in the case of life, it's the DNA pairs, the base pairs, the A and T and C and G. And then we have those pairs put together, those three-letter words represent one of the 20 left-handed amino acids that make up life. And the sequence of codons in the DNA represents a sequence of amino acids in a protein. And the action is the proteins are needed for construction, function, maintenance, reproduction of the living cell. And the purpose of all that, the purpose of all these is reproduction of life. You need all of this, all that complexity. And here again is an expanded picture of the cell. I'm sure you've seen this in some of your biology books. Very, very complex. So do we have any evidence for design life? Yes. Biology, the presence of complex and functionally integrated machines cast doubt on the Darwinian mechanisms of self-assemblies. We see all the complexity. There's no way that those complex machines, the complex code, could come together by random chance processes. We see in the molecular biology the presence of information encoded in the DNA. And here's just another picture of that. Here's a Lewontin, who's a Harvard biologist. He's not a believer. He urges scientists to embrace a materialism that is absolute. Only believe in materialism, only believe in matter and energy, and to stick with material explanations no matter how counterintuitive. There's no way they can explain it, but they stick to it because they don't accept God.
We've shown that DNA is actually the software of life. It's totally interchangeable between the digital world and the biological world.
The DNA code itself is so digital, is so almost exactly like a computer tape.
Totally interchangeable.
The DNA code itself
is the software of life.
Is so digital.
Scientists have come to the amazing conclusion that our bodies contain digital code. In fact, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, tweeted, "DNA is more advanced than any software ever created." Think about it. A program or code is written by someone very smart. The more complex the code, the more intelligent the author has to be. So here's the question. If our DNA code is more complex than any man-made software, where did it come from? Is it possible it was authored without an author, programmed without a program? Materialists think so, through neo-Darwinism, the modern version of Darwinian evolution. Stephen Meyer, author of the New York Times bestseller, Darwin's Doubt, explains.
According to neo-Darwinism, new genetic information arises as a result of random mutations in the arrangement of the nucleotide bases along the spine of the DNA molecule. If those
Okay, so they're just putting it all together in that short video clip. There's no way that information can be formed by random chance processes. It just doesn't work. And here's a way to think of it. You talk about flipping a coin, heads or tail. And if you flip them often enough, mostly you're going to come 50% heads and 50% tails. What's the chance of getting just one head with two throws? It's half. What about if I try to get three heads in a row? Well, if I throw it, 8 times, I'll get, 1/8. 10 heads in a row. Well, I'll probably have to do it 2 to the 10th, 2 to the 10th here, which is in terms of decimal system is 1024, or you can think of it as 10 to the power of 3. 100 heads in a row. Well, that'll take you 10 to the power of 30 throws to get 100 in a row. And then more impossible, 1,000 heads in a row, 1 and 10 to the power of 300. not going to happen by chance. And so that's what we deal with when we look at the complexity of the cell, the complexity of life. There's a mathematical law of probability that anything less than 1 and 10 to the power of 50 is mathematically impossible. So these things here, those are impossible. This one here is impossible, just not going to happen. Okay, so that little bit about probability. Here's some crazy things. What's the probability of an explosion in a junkyard creating a car? Meaning you go to a car junkyard and you got all the parts of the cars, a whole bunch of cars, and now you have an explosion. What's the probability of forming a running car? 0. It ain't going to happen. What about creating a Boeing airplane that can fly? Well, Boeing airplane consists of 5 million parts, and all of those parts don't fly. What's the chance of an explosion in a large junkyard forming an airplane? You're not going to convince anybody about that. So it's going to take an intelligent agent to come up with a design, first of all, and then put it all together. Then we look in terms of life. What's the probability of a protein coming into being by chance? Well, here's the parts of a protein. Proteins consist of amino acids. I said there are a few thousand different types. Half of them are right-handed, and the other half are left-handed. Well, the building blocks of life, the proteins, require a large organic molecule which contain hundreds to even a few thousand amino acids in a certain sequence. There's specified long sequences of amino acids. And it contains 20 different left-hand amino acids. If you form a protein with all the right amino acids in a row, and you removed one of them or added one, would that protein still work? No, it wouldn't. It requires a very specific order. So you can take one away or add one, and it'll be useless if you try and remove a piece from that. So let me skip this one here. How simple can life be? Remember, I told you that the human genome, we have up to 3 billion DNA base pairs. The smallest bacteria has 580,000 DNA base pairs. Pretty complex. What is the chance that you could get all the right parts, and by chance you would form a small bacteria? The probability is 0. It just is not going to happen. So if that can't happen, what about human genome? It's not going to happen. It cannot happen by chance. So if you look at put it in context, one single protein of 400 amino acids in a specific order, what's the probability of getting that? That's 1 in 10 to the power of 240. What about a single cell? This here. That's 1 in 10 to the power of 40,000 for the spontaneous formation of life. There are only 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the whole universe. And then we come against this law of mathematical probability. Anything less than 1 in 10 to the 50th is impossible mathematically. And see, all of these numbers here are larger than 50. It isn't going to happen. Cannot be explained by mathematical probability. Here's how an evolutionist, Paul Davies from Australia, here's what he would say. He would say, it's a shame that there are precious few hard facts when it comes to the origin of life. We have a rough idea when it began on Earth, some interesting theories about where, but the how part has everybody stumped. Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organized themselves into the first living cell. Evolutionists. He admits we have no clue how it could happen, but we just won't accept an intelligent agent. Here's a German information scientist, and he's a creationist. He says there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. It just can't happen. Here's an expert in information theory. So then we have, in conclusion, remember, life consists of material and energy, which is something we can see and feel, and it's material, and information, which we cannot see, and it's non-material. Life requires this information. It requires machines, as we saw. It requires programs in the DNA. It requires complexity, both irreducible complexity, which is all the parts, and specified complexity, because in the case of a word, all the letters have to be in a very specified order to have meaning. And that requires a design. Life requires design, and design requires a designer. So life from non-life, not a chance. Ain't gonna happen, no way. Information is the basis for life. Information requires an intelligent design. And that's summarized in these 2 points here. Information is the basis for life. I believe that's the last point in your fill-in slides there. Information requires an intelligent mind. So that's the conclusion we draw from this. And it's very important because this is one of the key arguments against evolution. Life requires a design, pure and simple. There's no way around it. So I've recorded this lecture, and I intend to put it up on my YouTube channel, and I'll give Bill and Jennifer a link to that when we have that completed. So if we have some questions, I guess we can take a few now. Let's see. Okay. So if we have questions out there, we can.
I have a question in the audience here. Okay. Okay. So Heinz, the question is, in the slide presentation, you said there were 400 amino acids, and he had a question about, he had heard that there were 20 amino acids.
There are, to explain, there are thousands of different kinds of amino acids, and some are left-handed and some are right-handed. The life only uses 20 left-handed amino acids, and if you remember for those who went to school recently, the Miller experiment, where Miller claims to have formed some components of life, the amino acids in this experiment. Well, what he produced was 50% left-handed and 50% right-handed, and they're not the right left-handed aminos to make life. And you can't mix left and right for life. It's only left-handed.
To clarify? Kind of. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think he was referring to the 400 amino acids in a sequence for a protein. Well, that's just an example. There are proteins with more amino acids and there are proteins with less, but they're all in a very specific order.
I believe so. Okay. Yeah. Let me just check. Okay, question, Heinz, or if anybody else has the answer to this one. The question is, how many proteins, different kinds of proteins, are in our body?
I believe it's in the tens of thousands. I can't, I don't remember the exact number, but it's in the tens of thousands.
I'm not sure. I think, yeah, my thought too, are they still looking and discovering, like there's, kind of, there's more to it than we know, right? The enzymes that they're doing. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, Phil has a question. Hang on. Okay, Bill's, he just had a question that came to him about the number of atoms in the universe, if they are constant or if they're increasing and decreasing or fluctuating.
I believe, well, I don't know. We can't measure. This is an estimated number, 10 to the power of 80, which is a huge number. And I don't think we can be more specific than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Can we close out the Zoom part now? Thank you. Thank you, Heinz. Appreciate all this. We really enjoyed your presentation. I'm doing a applause here, and ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on Zoom.
Let me just add that you see at the bottom of the slide, I think the slide is still up there.
Yes, you can still see.
So if you have any questions, you're free to email me at that email address on the slide. And also my website, my main website is just myname.com. And then all of my messages, this being one of them, you can find here under messages on my website.
Excellent.
So there are hundreds of different messages out there, and messages going back well, at least 12 years. A lot of them from my lectures over in Europe as well, and courses as well.
We'll do some, let me see if, I didn't get that one either. So let me ask, Heinz, can I ask you a specific question from the paper?
Sure.
Number 11 asked how many cells are in your body?
Yeah, it's the number that I use is 75 trillion.
Okay.
Yeah, but I've seen different numbers from ranging from 60 to 100 trillion.
60 to 100. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Large number.
Wow. Well, thank you, Heinz, so much for your talk. We appreciate it. And thank you for your patience and technology. Those of you who are on Zoom and participating, we're going to close out the Zoom meeting and then wrap up from here. So thank you so much, Heinz. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it over to Bill. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right. I'm going to mute myself here. All right. And let me mute.